So Gary, what I'd like to do is just dive into some of the slides and some
Yeah.
of the pages from your listing presentation so that everyone can see what the key parts of the conversation are going to be when you go into that listing presentation, into that listing appointment. I think the first one is this slide where you talk about the difference of how we're going to perform, because this is where a promise is being made. And so maybe just kind of quickly run through what happens. You knock on the door, you go in. So maybe just quickly run everybody through up to, we've got the listing opportunity, but how do we get to this place? And then we pick it up from there.
Okay, so first and foremost, this slide addresses the two biggest questions that your sellers have for you. Number one is how much can you sell my house for and how fast? So what we do is we just address it. But like Chris said, is we differentiate ourselves through the entire listing appointment. So, where most realtors will go and knock on the door and the seller says, hey, you want to take a look around? What we do is we actually have a 5-phase listing appointment that is vastly different than what everybody else does. So number one, that first step, most people, they'll go tour the house with the seller. Well, we're going to flip that on its head. The first step we say is, I can't wait to inspect your home with you, but first I'd love to sit down next to you and ask you a few more questions. So then that first step, we sit down at the kitchen table. I'm verifying everything that we talked about during our initial phone consultation. So that's a first step. The second step is actually inspecting the home or assessing the home. And so we'll get up, we'll go through the entire house with them. We'll ask them a lot of questions, ask them what they love most about the house, etc. We'll document everything. And then when we sit back down, that's step number 2. Step number 3 is the listing presentation. We actually call this our marketing proposal. And so in this step, we go through, Chris, I'm trying to think, I think maybe we've got like 22 slides.
I think there's about 22 in total. I think today we're only going to share about 6 or 7 of them today.
Well, here's the thing. This one right here, Chris, is the most powerful slide. And so what I love to do is to handle what a client's concerns are before they become objections. So many of us are trained in how do I handle all these objections? And I look at it and I'm like, what if we just handle it before it becomes an objection? And so in this slide, we're handling objections like, well, will you discount your commission? Will you discount it like Sally Sue down the road?
How are you addressing that before it becomes an issue by sharing this?
So on this slide, I would ask, by the way, a little tip for everybody, always ask a question at the beginning of every slide. And I would say something like this. So, Chris, do you like statistics?
Sure, they don't lie.
Yeah, you know what? They don't lie. And the reason I love statistics, and these statistics in particular, is because it really helps me reaffirm how well my firm and I are outperforming the marketplace and outperforming my competition. Let's take a look at this, Chris. Chris, in Austin, were you aware that in Austin right now, an average realtor is selling a home in about 48 days? Now, that's not bad, right?
Sure.
Yeah, not bad. Now, however, when you hire Creth partners, on average, we're selling homes in under 16 days. Now, that's a lot faster, isn't it?
Yeah, heck yeah.
Well, Chris, also in Austin right now, an average realtor is selling a house for about 98.25% of their asking price. Now, that's not bad, right? I can tell you that's a really good statistic. However, when you hire us at Creth Partners, on average, we're selling homes for 101.7% of asking price. Now, that is 3.45% more than our competition. Now, let's take a look at this, Chris. Let's assume that we sell your house for $375,000. On average, we're going to earn you $12,937 more than an average realtor. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a lot of money.
Now, can you explain to everybody some of that subtle ninja jujitsu that you were just working there? Because you've done several things there by calculating the amount that is going to come back to them.
Sure.
When you sell your home with my firm, on average, you're earn 3.45% more. Here's what it means to you. Can you explain to everybody what's going on there?
Sure. Let's review some of the steps there. As number one, I asserted that, hey, Chris, let's assume we sell your house for $375,000. Now, do I know how much you want to sell your house for? Of course I do, because I asked you during the initial phone consultation. And, I'll tell you, Chris, in selling real estate over 22 years, I don't think I've ever had a client actually say, you know what, it's worth whatever you say it's worth. They don't do that. And in fact, they all believe that their house is really special. It's like parents and kids. My kids are really special.
Well, you have an emotional investment in it, and you don't. And for most sellers, they have inaccurate information in which they're using to base the price off.
That's the whole thing. They don't have accurate information, and so we're providing that. But what I'm doing is I'm already handling one objection is, won't you sell my house for more? Isn't it worth a little bit more? It's like, no. I'm going to go ahead and share with you right now what the value is worth, but in a very
subtly, you're planting a seed. Way. You haven't said, here's what it's worth, or assume we sell it for $345,000. Here's what that means to you, right? So all of a sudden, before you talk about price, you've just planted a little seed so that when you come back for that conversation, they're not shocked that it's worth $375,000. But there's more to it than that, because you calculated the amount there, and so they have like an actual concrete number of what it's going to look like and the benefit in hiring.
Chris, if I just say we sell homes for 3.45% more than an average realtor in Austin, does that really mean anything to you? Not until we actually calculate it. And so what we did is we calculate it, we show them the numbers. By the way, a little trick here is I turn off, you know how your phone turns the screen off automatically after like 15 or 30 seconds? I disable that because I want this number front and center, and then I take this and I plop it down right between us. And I leave it there for the duration of our listing appointment. So anytime they think, well, I wonder, is now the time for me to ask if he'll discount the commission? They look down, they're like, oh.
So another thing that this step does is it arms and equips you with the information that you need to be able to handle that objection of, will you discount your commission? Because you're giving them an actual number of, well, that the commission part's not relevant because I'm going to actually make you more when it comes time to sell your home, right?
Yeah. Well, you know what happens, Chris, is when they see these numbers, and I leave this between us, when we get to the pricing conversation and when we get to talking about my fees, rarely now do they say, well, will you discount your commission? So-and-so said they would do it for less. They don't do that anymore because I've already shown them why I won't.
Gotcha. So after going through that conversation, it really so after you've made these promises, right? So going back to that slide, we're making we're inferring. We're not making promises here. We're inferring some promises of, hey, we're going to sell your home faster and we're going to sell your home for more. Now,
and by the way, Chris, I think you heard me say on average.
On average. But what's being inferred there is we are to perform better. What the next question that they likely will not ask, but is sort of lingering in their mind is, well, how are you going to do that? Right now, we've given them a little bit of ammo to work with because we gave them our property marketing plan, but we need to have a conversation about it. And so the next step then is remembering that the number one thing that they want us to do is to market the home to buyers, right? So we got to make sure we know that. And another thing for you guys to know is that according to the National Association of Realtors, everybody, basically 9 out of 10 people are using the internet to search for homes, which leads us to the next dialogue that we want to share, which is that, did you know that over 95% of home buyers use the internet part of your search? And can you see why it's critical to hire a firm using innovative marketing strategies? Okay, so what we want to do is tee up the next set of slides and conversation where we talk about the marketing campaign and all the marketing activities and the information that was contained in that property marketing plan, and start having that conversation about it in the middle of your listing presentation, right? You're actually going to talk about what you're going to do. And in this case, in the slide here, it's, really what you're trying to do is tell a story. You're trying to tell a narrative that has already been reviewed by them in that property marketing plan. But,
maybe we have to remind them, we have to show them. And by the way, Chris, this is a great place to remind them of how well you outperform the marketplace. And you could say something like this, like, Chris, in our conversations, we were talking about how well Kreth Partners outperforms the marketplace, and on average, how much more money, remember, we can earn you than an average realtor in Austin. And you might be asking yourself, well, wow, that's a lot of money. You sell it a lot faster. How do you do it? So why don't we go ahead and take a look at that? So this is a great place to remind them of our differentiation and then talk about how we're going to do that.
And so for us, we talk about how we are going to build up demand in the market with our pre-launch campaign. We talk about the ongoing marketing and campaign and activities and the places where it's going to be marketed and the steps and activities that we're going to do on a weekly basis to make sure that as many possible people are seeing that home. We're going to even include everything from like, hey, we're going to do an open house to all the open house marketing that we're going to do. And it's all part of this conversation. You know, you have to talk about social media because people have that expectation now that you're going to be on social media. And so we really just explained to everybody everything that we're going to do and what we're going to do to market the home. Now, by this point, what we've done is we've created in the mind of that seller and that prospective seller is we've inferred some claims and promises of how we're going to outperform the market on average. And now we've given them the specifics on how we do that, right? So you make the promise and then you deliver on how we're going to deliver on that. But what happens next is, you know, you've got to start moving towards closing the deal, right? And having some closing strategies as well as being able to handle objections is how you start to navigate from talking about here's what I do and here's what I'm going to do for you and here's how you're going to benefit to now we got to wrap up this conversation because we would like to walk away with a signed agreement, right? We all want
to sign the dotted line.
But you want to do this tactfully, and this is oftentimes the part where people may fumble the ball a little bit. You know, I think what I've actually observed for folks who are newer at this, and I know we have a really broad range of experience here, but usually a lot of times when people are new at this is where they fumble it. This is where, because, you know, they're not quite sure how to make that transition. They're not quite sure how to handle some of these objections. And when they get hit up with, will you discount your fees? They don't know how to deal with it. Or when they get hit up with, my home is worth for more, I'm only going to list with somebody who lists my home for more. They accept that, right? And so let's talk a little bit about how we start to navigate the close and how we handle those objections. Well, Gary, you always say the best way to handle an objection is to do it before it comes up, right? Yep. And so one of the first things to do as a closing strategy, guys, is to let the client that you're working with, let them know what's going to happen during the listing appointment. Gary, why do they do this?
One of the biggest things that drives me crazy, Chris, is we don't educate our clients with what's about to happen. And then we just show up and we make it happen. And then they're like, oh, well, that was refreshing, but that's at the end. And in fact, what we want to do is strategically, if we can educate them about our process and say something like this. Now, at the end of our conversation, and we talk about the marketing proposal and your home valuation, at the end of that, assuming that you and I both agree that we're a great fit for one another, we will review my marketing agreement and sign off on that. So that will allow me to get to start working for you immediately. And so I'm setting the platform, setting the stage long before it happens, because I don't want to just get there and smack them upside the head with this listing agreement. It's like, no, I'm going to set the stage and inform you that if we both agree that we're a good fit for one another, we're going to sign an agreement.
So as you approach the time to have that conversation, because you've educated them on what's going to happen, you can say, and now we're going to talk about the value of your home. And now we're going to talk about the marketing agreement, so that there's no like abrupt transition to bang, let me hit you over the head. Are you going to list with me or not? Right? Yeah. So instead, you're just navigating this process like a professional. And the key is for them and for you, it's a good reminder for ourselves to have this process, remember this process, so that you can refer to it throughout the listing presentation. So you have just a natural step into whatever the next step's going to be. Now, one of the common objections that you're going to get is, like Gary said, is people who feel like their home is worth more.
It's either worth more or we want to price it just a little bit high so that we have some room for negotiation.
And one of the things that you're really good at doing, Gary, is educating the customer. And so in the listing presentation, you actually have information and slides in your listing presentation where you educate the customer on pricing and preparations, so that when we get into that pricing conversation and the pricing strategy, they now have more information. They're better equipped to make the right decision. But can you talk about what you do to educate the customer about your pricing strategy?
Sure, absolutely. So one thing, as a reminder, on every single slide, I'm going to ask a question in the beginning, and I'll say something like this. So Chris, have you ever been looking at homes online and you find this one house and you're like, oh my gosh, that is so overpriced. I'll never even go look at that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, all the time, right?
Yeah, everybody does. Well, Chris, one thing we want to make sure of is that, all of those homes are priced way out of the market. And that's all these homes with the red X's through them. They're either way overpriced or in really poor condition, and home buyers will not go see that house. And we don't want your house to be like that, right?
Right. You want to make sure they know that if you way overprice it, people aren't going to meet you in the middle. They're just not going to look at your house, right?
They're not even going to look at it. And then you say, we don't want you to fall to that, do you? And you'll be like, no. I say, okay, great. Well, we're not going to grossly overprice your house. Additionally, have you ever walked into a house and said, wow, it's a decent house, but gosh, it's priced a little bit high? Yeah, that's a common tactic. And people do that because they want negotiating room. Well, here's what I can share with you, Chris, is that on average, those homes actually sell for less than market value because a home buyer will go in there and lowball them because they know it's overpriced. And gosh, we don't want that to happen to you either, do we?
No, because you can end up chasing the price down, right? With
That's
the
right.
lowballing.
And so you'll actually get less than market value. The best strategy, Chris, is to make sure that we have your house appropriately priced and in pristine condition. This is what we call being in the marketplace. And by the way, when we do that, we are actually able to demand more than market value for your home because we create so much demand and people see the value. Now that's where we want to be, don't we?
Right. When you factor in the marketing and your pricing strategy, along with the condition of the home, now all of a sudden you create a scenario that has demand, i.e. there's a lot of people looking at it that are interested in it. And that is by definition, the key influencer on price is going to be the amount of demand for that home or for that neighborhood or for that market, right? It's the demand that's there. And so if you can do everything at your disposal to generate demand. And that's what our job is, right? Our job is to not just throw this thing out there and hope that it sells. We want to generate demand so that we can command for our customers the best possible outcome. And that's what you're doing here all through this educational process, is letting them know, so that when you get to what the price of the home is, now they know, well, gosh, if I say, let's price this thing really high, Gary already told me why not to do that. And if I want to go with what my gut inclination is based on, not selling any real estate as the seller, or should I listen to this expert who's been educating me and obviously has all this expertise? So do you ever run into point, like when someone says, like, how do you usually deal with it? Does it come up for you, Gary, when you have that conversation and what the price of the home is, what the market's willing to bear? Are people like, oh no, Gary, you're crazy? Because all the times that I've observed it, people are like, okay.
Well, I think, Chris, it depends on two things. Number one is your client reasonable? And if they're not, that's fine, because I don't want to work with them anyway. Right. But if they're reasonable and you provide them with the proof of what similar buyers are paying for similar homes right now in the marketplace, to say, okay, then what happens is, as you provide them with that education, that information, they can make more well-educated decisions about that. And then they always agree. They don't always say, they don't say, well, no, my house is still worth more. If they do, it's like, well, you know what? Why don't we go hop in the car right now? Let's take a look at some of these homes. Right. And then you walk in, they're like, all right, you got me.
Well, once they see what they're competing against in the marketplace, right? And what we're trying to do is just equip them with the knowledge that they need to make the right decisions, so they don't have to pay the price of it taking longer to sell or for selling less than what the market value is. And that's really what we're just trying to do and prepare them for. And one of the big things that come up, of course, we already addressed this one, Gary, by talking about how we use this information to be able to combat the objection of, will you discount your fees, by sharing this. So now, if at the end of the conversation, they still say, will you discount your fees? You just kind of throw back to your calculator and this slide. And what do you say?
I'm sorry, you cut out there for me, Chris.
Sorry. So at a certain point, sometimes people are still going to say, despite everything that you've said, will you discount your fees?
Yeah, and then I say, you know what? I apologize. Apparently, I didn't do a very good job of explaining how well we outperform the marketplace. So let's go ahead and take a look again at that slide of how well we're outperforming the marketplace and how much more money on average we're going to earn you than the average realtor. And then at that point, they're like, yeah, you know, you're right. I remember. I just had to ask. They always say,
Right.
I just had to ask. And I say, hey, I got no problem with that.